welcome. This is Emily from Hefner Studio at Kitchener Public Library, and in this video we'll chat about how to 3D print a fantasy minifigure. Let's check it out. Some of you might be wondering if it's even possible to print a mini, which is a super small figurine, on our 3D printers. So first of all, let's learn a few fundamental settings with Cura. Now, Cura is the open source software to slice your 3D object and get it ready for printing. Something I want you to keep in mind is to expect from the get-go to test and try different settings and test and try some more. There's a lot of variables related to whether you get a good print or a failed print. Some of these variables might be the filament, the type of printer, the size of the nozzle, or the support structure that you've chosen for your print. Some of the things we've learned is that it is possible to print a mini with the Ultimaker 2 Plus. We're using a 0.4mm nozzle and PLA filament. And originally I thought it was totally impossible to print a mini because we encountered so many problems, but we have ironed out some of those wrinkles. Second of all, why are these such a challenge to print on FDM printers? These printers fuse deposition modeling. It builds the print from the bottom up, layer by layer by layer. And it's like a hot glue gun of hot plastic string. Some mini models have many challenging angles for weapons, capes, accessories, and other details, which makes it extra complicated to try to print. It's basically a stress test for the printer. So this leads us to use supports for the prints, and the supports can be very challenging to remove after your print is finished. I'd like you to take a minute to consider that some of the prints that you're attempting to print, it might not be even meant for printing. Sometimes it's just concept art, and it might not be really suitable to become a printable object. So some 3D designers have sculpted their 3D design with the ease of printing in mind, such as this maker here, Dutch Mogul. This specific Dragon Knight was crafted with 3D printing in mind. So a lot of the angles are less than a 45. There's a really good chance that this is going to be tested by the maker and before it's released. So you would have good luck printing this. But some designers have the concepts and not the print as their priority. Another thing to consider is that there are many types of 3D printing, and some may work better with an SLA or liquid resin type printer, where it's just easier to remove the support structures than with the FDM printer. Let's dig in and take a look at what setting up a file for printing typically looks like. Okay, so here I've loaded up one of the minis. This is the Elf Ranger by Dutch Mogul. And I'm going to adjust some settings. So I want you to pay close attention to the layer height. For the minis, I recommend either a 0.1 or a 0.08. Originally, I'd heard about using 0.05, but I've later learned that that creates a little bit too much heat in the model for the lower layers as the model builds up and can lead to a little bit of warping and drooping and not turning out really great image. So let's try 0.1 today. Okay, and next I want to look at the infill. So again, 50% is good. Typically, I know a lot of folks that want to print the models want to print them completely solid with the thought that the model would be super strong But with 50% infill, your model is still strong, but again, you're not having that problem of the plastic remaining kind of too hot as the model builds up the structure. Turns out it's really just not necessary. So I'd grab infill at 50%. Okay, now you can see some settings here, like print speed. I have turned that down a little bit to 45, and that is because I want the print to go a little bit slower and take its time and really adhere to the base plate. But I don't want it to go too slow and again create too much heat, too much warping. Okay, so if we wanted to add supports, if we thought our model needed it, that's where we would just check it off. And typically, if it is a model like this, instead of just touching base plate, we are going to want it to fill in everywhere. And last but not least, we have the base adhesion. So I've selected a brim and the brim width. I've actually turned that down to only 3 millimeters. So it's just a small brim, but that will hold your object on the plate solidly without the base of the model warping up as it sits on that heated plate. Okay, and let's slice the model to see how long that might take us to print. Okay, so 2 hours and 4 minutes, that's not bad for a model like this. So again, the smaller the layer height, the longer it's going to take to print. So just be aware of that. And we can get a preview of the object here. And you can see the supporting lines have really lined up with the bow and the arms. So yeah, you can see here we've got a nice support structure. We can see the brim, and it's looking really good. All right, so we're all done. We would go save to SD card and we would send that to the printer. And here is just a note about supports. So as a reminder, a printer is pretty amazing and it can print up to a 40-degree angle without support structure. But after that, it's a little bit of a risk to see if the printer can print material in thin air. Typically, that doesn't work out. Make sure you've got your support structure clicked for any projects with lots of tricky angles. All right, so let's take a look at some examples of typical fantasy D&D characters. So here's a spellcaster with a wand and a book and a cape. So those are like 3 super tricky things to print. This is a super stress test. And here is an example of using zigzag supports. So zigzag supports are pretty tricky to remove from the model. The good thing about them is they're super strong and it's holding up the wand and the book, and that made the print survive the printing process. Unfortunately, I was not able to remove those tough zigzag supports without damaging my print. This is an example of line supports. So we can see a little bit better. It looked like there was a problem with the line support as it was printing. So we do have a little bit of a mess around the wand, but that could be cleaned up post-processing. But you can see I was able to grab a lot of the line supports and remove them successfully without damaging the wand or the arms or the cape. Now, this is my favorite type of mini to print. A print designed for the ease of printing. So these are supportless. So again, it's been intentional by the designer for these to be able to print quickly, effectively, and without that messy process of removing supports that may take, from minutes to hours. All right, so this is a dwarf axeman, and it looks like I could go back and clean up a few bits and pieces with a file or a nail file or some sandpaper before I started to cover it with paint and that kind of thing for post-processing. I've got another example here that Dragon Knight example, but printed this time. And you can see, again, we've got a few artifacts left over that we could take away when we get it ready for painting. But otherwise, it turned out really great. No supports, and much quicker than files that we needed supports on. Okay, another really awesome example of some creativity with 3D design is basically the creator here has split the object down the center. So A, there's no needs for supports. B, it prints very quickly on the base plate. And C, it's able to glue that together and then paint it with much less post-processing work with support removal and that kind of thing. And I just wanted to mention that this is by the same maker. So Dutch Mogul created this one as well. So final thoughts is to encourage you to come into Hefner Studio or Kitchener Public Library and test and try and test again until you have prints that you're happy with. One last thing is you can take a look at the Baby Yoda and a Spellcaster and an Archer. And these ones, we were able to stress test that printer and print them supportless. So it gives you lots of options. There are many files out there that are supportless, and you can usually find that out on the comments on Thingiverse, whether users had success printing them without supports or not. So always check the comments on Thingiverse and check the makes and see the results before you decide on a file to print. All right. If you would like more details, be sure to check kpl.org.